This is Jeeves and the Feudal Spirit by P G Wodehouse, the first 2 chapters. As I sat in the bathtub, soaping a meditative foot and singing, if I remember correctly, Pale Hands I Loved Besides the Shalimar, it would be deceiving my public to say that I was feeling bumps-a-daisy. The evening that lay before me promised to be one of those sticky evenings, no good to man or beast. My Aunt Dahlia, writing from her country residence, Brinkley Court down in Worcestershire, had asked me, as a personal favour, to take some acquaintance of hers out to dinner, a couple of the name of Trotter. They were, she said, creeps of the first water, and would bore the pants off me. But it was imperative that they were given the old oil, because she was in the middle of a very tricky business deal with the male half of the sketch, and at such times every little helps. "Don't fail me, my beautiful, bountiful Bertie," her letter had concluded, on a note of poignant appeal. Well, this Dahlia is my good and deserving aunt, not to be confused with Aunt Agatha, the one who kills rats with her teeth and devours her young. So, when she says, "Don't fail me," I don't fail her. But, as I say, I was in no sense looking forward to the binge. The view I took of it was that the curse had come upon me. It had done so, moreover, at a moment when I was already lowered spiritually by the fact that for the last couple of weeks or so, Jeeves had been away on his summer holiday. Round about the beginning of July each year he downs tools, the slacker, and goes off to Bognor Regis for the shrimping, leaving me in much the same position as those poets one used to have to read at school, who were always beefing about losing gazelles. For without this right-hand man at his side, Bertram Wooster becomes a mere shadow of his former self, and in no condition to cope with any ruddy trotters. Brooding darkly on these trotters, whoever they might be, I was starting to scour the left elbow, and had switched to Sweet Mystery of Life, when my reverie was interrupted by the sound of a soft footstep in the bedroom, and I sat up, alert, and, as you might say, agog, their throat frozen in my grasp. If feet were stepping softly in my sleeping quarters, it could only mean, I felt, unless, of course, a burglar had happened to drop in, that the prop of the establishment had returned from his vacation, no doubt looking bronzed and fit. A quiet cough told me that I had reasoned astutely, and I gave tongue. "Is that you, Jeeves?"
"Yes, sir."
"Home again, what?"
"Yes, sir."
"Welcome to 3A Berkeley Mansions, London W1, I said, feeling like a shepherd when a strayed sheep comes trickling back to the fold. "Did you have a good time?"
"Most agreeable, thank you, sir."
"You must tell me all about it."
Certainly, sir, at your convenience."
"I'll bet you hold me spellbound. What are you doing in there?"
"A letter has just arrived for you, sir. I was placing it on the dressing-table. Will you be dining in, sir?"
"No, out, blast it! A blind date with some slabs of gorgonzola sponsored by Aunt Dahlia. So if you want to go to the club, carry on." As I have mentioned elsewhere in these memoirs of mine, Jeeves belongs to a rather posh club for butlers and valets called the Junior Ganymede, situated somewhere in Curzon Street, and I knew that After his absence from the metropolis, he would be all eagerness to buzz round there and hobnob with the boys, picking up the threads and all that sort of thing. When I've been away for a week or two, my first move is always to make a beeline for the drones. I can see you getting a rousing welcome from the members with a hey nonny nonny and a hot cha-cha, I said. Did I hear you say something about there being a letter for me?
Yes, sir. It was delivered a moment ago by special messenger.
Important, do you think?
One can only conjecture, sir.
Better open it and read contents.
Very good, sir.
There was a stage wait of about a minute and a half, during which my moodiness now much lightened. I wondered, roll out the barrel, I love a lassie, and every day I bring thee violets, in the order named. In due season his voice filtered through the woodwork.
The letter is of considerable length, sir. Perhaps if I were to give you its substance?
Do so, Jeeves, already at this end.
It is from a Mr. Percy Gorringe, sir. Omitting extraneous matter and concentrating on essentials, Mr. Gorringe wishes to borrow £1,000 from you.
I started sharply, causing the soap to shoot from my hand and fall with a dull thud on the bath mat. With no preliminary warning to soften the shock, his words had momentarily unmanned me. It is not often that one is confronted with ear-biting on so majestic a scale, a fiver till next Wednesday being about the normal tariff. You said, what, Jeeves? £1,000? But who is this hound of hell? I don't know any Gorringes.
I gather from his communication that you and the gentleman have not met, sir, but he mentions that he is a stepson of a Mr. L. G. Trotter, with whom Mrs. Travers appears to be acquainted.
I nodded. Not much use, of course, as he couldn't see me.
Yes,
he's on solid ground there, I admitted. Aunt Dahlia does know Trotter. He's the bloke she has asked me to put the nosebag on with tonight. So far, so good. But I don't see that being Trotter's stepson entitles this Gorringe to think that he can sit on my lap and help himself to the contents of my wallet. I mean, it isn't a case of any stepson of yours, L.G. Trotter, is a stepson of mine. Dash it, Jeeves, once start letting yourself be touched by stepsons, and where are you? The word flies round the family circle that you're a good provider, and uproll all the sisters and cousins and aunts and nephews and uncles to stake out their claims, several being injured in the crush. The place becomes a shambles.
There is much in what you say, sir, but it appears to be not so much a loan as an investment that the gentleman is seeking. He wishes to give you the opportunity of contributing the money to the production of his dramatization of Lady Florence Cray's novel, Spindrift.
Oh, that's it, is it? I see. Yes, one begins to follow the trend of thought. This Florence Cray is... Well, I suppose you would call her a sort of step-cousin of mine, or cousin once removed, or something of that nature. She is Lord Wolperston's daughter, and old W, in a moment of temporary insanity, recently married my Aunt Agatha. En secondes noces, as I believe the expression is. She is one of those intellectual girls, her being crammed to bursting point with the little grey cells, and about a year ago, possibly because she was full of the divine fire, but more probably because she wanted something to take her mind off Aunt Agatha, she wrote this novel, and it was well received by the intelligentsia, who notoriously enjoy the most frightful bilge. Did you ever read Spindrift? I asked, retrieving the soap.
I skimmed through it, sir.
What did you think of it? Go on, Jeeves, don't be coy. The word begins with an L.
Well, sir, I would not go so far as to apply it to the adjective which I fancy you have in mind, but it seems to me a somewhat immature production lacking in significant form. My personal tastes lie more in the direction of Dostoevsky and the great Russians. Nevertheless, the story was not wholly devoid of interest, and might, quite possibly, have its appeal for the theatre-going public.
I mused a while. I was trying to remember something, but couldn't think what. Then I got it. But I don't understand this, I said. I distinctly recall Aunt Dahlia telling me that Florence had told her that some manager had taken the play and was going to put it on. Poor misguided sap, I recollect saying. Well, if that is so, why is Percy dashing about trying to get into people's ribs like this? What does he want 1,000 quid for? These waters are deep, Jeeves.
That is explained in the gentleman's letter, sir. It appears that one of the syndicate financing the venture, who had promised the sum in question, finds himself unable to fulfil his obligations. This, I believe, frequently happens in the world of theatre.
I mused again, letting the moisture from the sponge slide over the torso. Another point presented itself. But why didn't Florence tell Percy to go and have a pop at Stilton Cheesewhite? She being engaged to him, I mean. One would have thought that Stilton, linked to her by bonds of love, would have been the people's choice.
Possibly Mr. Cheesewright has not £1,000 at his disposal, sir.
That's true. I see what you're driving at. Whereas I have, you mean?
Precisely, sir.
The situation had clarified somewhat. Now that I had the facts, I could discern that Percy's move had been based on sound principles. When you are trying to raise 1,000 quid, the first essential, of course, is to go to someone who has got 1,000 quid. And no doubt he had learnt from Florence that I was stagnant with the stuff. But where he had made his error was in supposing that I was the king of the mugs, and that in the habit of scattering vast sums like bird seeds to all and sundry. Would you back a play, Jeeves?
No, sir.
Nor would I. I'll meet him with a firm nolle prosequi, I think, don't you? And keep the money in the old oak chest.
I would certainly advocate such a move, sir.
Right. Percy gets the bird. Let him eat cake. And now to a more urgent matter. While I'm dressing, will you be mixing me a strengthening cocktail?
Certainly, sir. A martini or one of my specials?
The latter. I spoke in no uncertain voice. It was not merely the fact that I was up against an evening with a couple whom Aunt Dahlia, always a good judge, had described as creeps, that influenced this decision on my part. I needed fortifying for another reason. These last few days, with Jeeves apt to return at any moment, it had been borne in upon me quite a good deal that when the time came for us to stand face to face, I should require something pretty authoritative in the way of bracers to nerve me for what would inevitably be a testing encounter, calling for all that I had of determination and the will to win. If I was to emerge from it triumphant, no stone must be left unturned and no avenue unexplored. You know how it is when two strong men live in close juxtaposition, if juxtaposition is the word I want. Differences arise, wills clash, bones of contention pop up and start turning handsprings. No one was more keenly alive than I to the fact that one such bone was scheduled to make its debut the instant I swam into his ken, and mere martinis, I felt, despite their numerous benefits, would not be enough to see me through the ordeal that confronted me. I was in quite fairly tense mood that I dried and clothed the person, and while it would perhaps be too much to say that as I entered the sitting-room some quarter of an hour later, I was a twitter. I was unquestionably conscious of a certain jumpiness. When Jeeves came in with a shaker, I dived at it like a seal going after a slice of fish, and drained a quick one, scarcely pausing to say, "Skin off your nose." The effect was magical. The apprehensive feeling left me, to be succeeded by a quiet sense of power. I cannot put it better than by saying that, as the fire coursed through my veins, Wooster, the timid fawn, became in a flash Wooster, the man of iron will, ready for anything. What Jeeves inserts in these specials of his I have never ascertained, but their morale-building force is extraordinary. They wake the sleeping tiger in a chap. Well, to give you some idea, I remember once, after a single one of them, striking the table with a clenched fist and telling my Aunt Agatha to stop talking rot. And I'm not sure it wasn't bally rot. "One of your best and brightest, Jeeves," I said, refilling the glass. "The weeks among the shrimps have not robbed your hand of its cunning." He did not reply. Speech seemed to have been wiped from his lips, and I saw, as I had foreseen would happen, that his gaze was riveted on the upper slopes of my mouth. It was a cold, disapproving gaze, such as a fastidious luncher who was not fond of caterpillars might have directed at one which he had discovered in his portion of salad. And I knew that the clash of wills for which I had been bracing myself was about to raise its ugly head. I spoke suavely, but firmly. You can't beat suave firmness on these occasions, and thanks to that life-giving special, I was able to be as firmly suave as Billy-O. There was no mirror in the sitting-room, but had there been, and had I caught a glimpse of myself in it, I have no doubt that I should have seen something closely resembling a haughty seigneur of the old regime, about to tell the domestic staff just where it got off. Something appears to be arresting your attention, Jeeves. Is there a smut on my nose? His manner continued frosty. There are moments when he looks just like a governess, one of which was this one.
No, sir. It is on the upper lip, a dark stain like mulligatawny soup.
I gave a careless nod. Ah, yes, I said. The moustache. That is what you are alluding to, is it not? I grew it while you were away. Rather natty, don't you think?
No, sir, I do not.
I moistened my lips with the special. Still suave to the gills, I felt strong and masterful. You dislike the little thing? Yes, sir. You don't feel it gives me a sort of air? How shall I put it? A kind of a diablerie?
No, sir.
You hurt and disappoint me, Jeeves, I said, sipping a couple of sips and getting suaver all the time. I could understand your attitude if the object under advisement was something bushy and waxed at the ends like a sergeant major's, but it is merely the delicate wisp of vegetation with which David Niven has for years been winning the applause of millions. When you see David Niven on the screen, you don't recoil in horror, do you?
No, sir. His moustache is very becoming to Mr. Niven.
But mine isn't to me?
No, sir.
It is at moments like this that a man realizes that the only course for him to pursue, if he is to retain his self-respect, is to unship the velvet hand in the iron glove. Or rather the other way about. Weakness at such a time is fatal. There are limits, I mean to say, and sharply defined limits at that, and these limits I felt had been passed by about 1.25 miles. I yield to nobody in my respect for Jeeves's judgment in the matter of socks, shoes, shirts, hats, and cravats, but I was dashed if I was going to have him muscling in and trying to edit the Worcester face. I finished my special and spoke in a quiet, level voice. I am sorry, Jeeves. I had hoped for your sympathy and cooperation. But if you are unable to see your way to sympathizing and cooperating, so be it. Come what may, however, I shall maintain the status quo. It is status quos that people maintain, isn't it? I have been put to considerable trouble and anxiety growing this moustache, and I do not propose to hew it off just because certain prejudiced parties, whom I will not specify, don't know a good thing when they see one. Je suis resté, Jeeves, I said, becoming a bit Parisienne. Well, after this splendid exhibition of resolution on my part, I suppose there was nothing much the chap could have said, except,
"Very good, sir,"
or something of that sort. But as it happened, he hadn't time to even say that, for the final word had scarcely left my lips when the front door bell tootled. He shimmered out, and a moment later shimmered in again.
"Mr. Cheesewright,"
he announced. And in clumped the massive form of the bird to whom he alluded. The last person I had expected to see, and for the matter of that, about the last one I wanted to. Chapter 2. I don't know if you have had the same experience, but I have always found that there are certain blokes whose mere presence tends to make me ill at ease, inducing the nervous laugh, the fiddling with the tie, and the embarrassing shuffling of the feet. Sir Roderick Glossop, the eminent loony doctor, until circumstances so arranged themselves that I was enabled to pierce the forbidding exterior and see the better, softer side, was one of these. J. Washburn Stoker, with his habit of kidnapping people on his yacht and throwing his weight about like a pirate of the Spanish Main, was another. And a third is this, G. Darcy, Stilton, Cheesewright. Catch Bertram Wooster vis-a-vis with him, and you do not catch him at his best. Considering that he and I have known each other since, as you might say, we were so high, having been at private school, Eton and Oxford together, we ought, I suppose, to be like Damon and what's his name, but we aren't by any means. I generally refer to him in conversation as that blighter Stilton, while he, I have been informed by usually reliable sources, makes no secret of his surprise and concern that I am still on the right side of the walls of Colney Hatch or some similar institution. When we meet, there is always a certain stiffness and what Jeeves would call an imperfect fusion of soul. One of the reasons for this, I think, is that Stilton used to be a policeman. He joined the force on coming down from Oxford with the idea of rising to a position of eminence at Scotland Yard, a thing you find a lot of the fellows you know doing these days. True, he turned in his truncheon and whistled shortly afterwards because his uncle wanted him to take up another walk of life. But these wazzers, even when retired, never quite shake off that "Where were you on the night of June the 15th manner?" And he seldom fails, when we run into one another, to make me feel like a rat of the underworld, detained for questioning in connection with some recent smash and grab raid. Add that the fact that his uncle of his wins his bread as a magistrate at one of the London police courts, and you will understand why I avoid him as much as possible and greatly prefer him elsewhere. The man of sensibility shrinks from being closeted with an ex-bluebottle with magistrate blood in him. In my demeanour, accordingly, as I rose to greet him, a close observer would have noticed more than a touch of the "to what am I indebted for the honour of this visit" stuff. I was at a loss to imagine what he was doing invading my privacy like this, and another thing that had fogged me was why, having invaded it, he was standing staring at me in a stern, censorious sort of a way, as if the sight of me had got right in amongst him, revolting his finest feelings. I might have been some dreg of society whom he had caught in the act of slipping a couple of ounces of cocaine to some other dreg. "Hum!" he said, and this alone would have been enough to tell an intelligent bystander, had there been one, that he had spent some time in the ranks of the force. One of the first things the Big Four teach the young recruit is to say, "Hum! I thought as much," he went on, knitting the brow. "Swilling cocktails, eh?" This was at the moment when, had conditions been normal, I would no doubt have laughed nervously, fingered the tie, and shuffled the feet. But with two of Jeeves's specials under my belt, still exercising their powerful spell, I not only remained intrepid, but retorted with considerable spirit, putting him right in his place. "I fail to understand you, officer," I said coldly. "Correct me if I am wrong, but I believe this is the hour when it is customary for an English gentleman to partake of our short snifter. Will you join me?" His lip curled. Most unpleasant. These coppers are bad enough when they leave their lips in statu quo. "No, I won't," he replied, curtly and offensively. "I don't want to ruin my constitution. What do you suppose those things are going to do to your eye and your power of control? How can you expect to throw doubles if you persist in stupefying yourself with strong drink? It's heartbreaking." I saw it. He was thinking of the darts sweep. The annual darts sweep is one of the high spots of life at the Drones Club. It never fails to stir the sporting instincts of the members, causing them to roll up in dense crowds and purchase tickets at 10 bob a go, with the result that the sum in the kitty is always colossal. This time my name had been drawn by Stilton, and as Horace Pendlebury Davenport, last year's winner, had gone and got married and at his wife's suggestion resigned his membership, the thing was pretty generally recognised as a sitter for me. Last year's runner-up. Worcester, the word flew to and fro, is the deadliest of snips. He throws a beautiful dart. So I suppose it was only natural in a way, standing, if all went well, to scoop in a matter of £56 10 Stilton should feel that it was his mission in life to see that I kept at the peak of my form. But that didn't make this incessant surveillance of his easier to endure. Ever since he had glanced at his ticket, seen that it bore the name of Worcester, and learned that I was a red-hot favourite for the tourney, his attitude towards me had been that of an official at Borstal, told off to keep an eye on the more than ordinarily up-and-coming juvenile delinquents. He had a way of looming up beside me at the club, sniffing quickly at my glass, and giving me an accusing look, coupled with a sharp whistling intake of the breath. And here he was now doing the same thing in my very home. It was worse than being back in a little Lord Fauntleroy suit and winglets and having a keen-eyed nurse always at one's elbow, watching one's every move like a bally hawk. I was about to say how deeply I resented being tailed up in this manner when he resumed. "I've come here tonight to talk to you seriously, Worcester," he said, frowning in a most unpleasant manner. "I am shocked at the casual, frivolous way in which you are treating this darts tournament. You seem not to be taking the most elementary precautions to ensure victory on the big day. It's the old story, overconfidence. All these fatheads keep telling you you're sure to win, and you suck it down like one of your beastly cocktails. Well, let me tell you that you're living in a fool's paradise. I happened to look in at the drones this afternoon, and Freddie Widgeon was at the darts board, stunning all beholders with a performance that took the breath away. His accuracy was sensational." I waved a hand and tossed the head. "In fact, I suppose you might say I bridled. He had wounded my amour propre." "Tchah!" I said, registering scorn.
Eh?
I said, "Tchah!" with reference to F. Widgeon. I know his form backwards, flashy, but with no staying power. The man will be less than the dust beneath my chariot wheels."
That's what you think. As I said before, confidence. You can take it from me that Freddie is a very dangerous competitor. I happen to know that he has been in strict training for weeks. He is knocked off smoking and has a cold bath every morning. Did you have a cold bath this morning?
"Certainly not. What do you suppose the hot tap's for?"
Do you do Swedish exercises before breakfast?
"I wouldn't dream of such a thing. Leave these exercises to the Swedes, I say."
No,
said Stilton bitterly.
all you do is riot and revel and carouse. I am told that you were at that party of Catsmeat Potter Purbrights last night. You probably reeled home at 3 in the morning, rousing the neighbourhood with drunken shouts.
I raised a haughty eyebrow. This police persecution was intolerable. "You would scarcely expect me, a constable," I said coldly, "to absent myself from the farewell supper of a boyhood friend who is leaving for Hollywood in a day or two, and may be away from civilization for years. Catsmeat would have been pained to his foundations if I had oiled out, and it wasn't 3 in the morning, it was 2:30.
Did you drink anything?
The merest sip.
And smoke?
The merest cigar.
I don't believe you. I'll bet if the truth was known,
said Stilton morosely, intensifying the darkness of his frown,
you lowered yourself to the level of the beasts in the field. I'll bet you whooped it up like a sailor in a Marseilles bistro. And from the fact that you were there in white, that there is a white tie round your neck and a white waistcoat attached to your foul stomach at this moment, I gather that you are planning to be off shortly to some other nameless orgy.
I laughed, one of my quiet laughs. Yeah, the word amused me. Orgy, eh? I'm giving dinner to some friends of my Aunt Dahlia's, and she strictly warned me to stay off the old Falernian, because my guests are teetotalers. When the landlord fills the flaring barrel, it will be with lemonade, a barley water, or possibly lime juice. So much for your nameless orgies. This, as I had expected, had a mollifying effect on his acerbity, if acerbity is the word I want. He did not become genial because he couldn't. But he became as nearly genial as it was in his power to be. He practically smiled.
"Capital,"
he said.
"Capital. Most satisfactory."
"I'm glad you're pleased. Well, good night."
Teetotalers, eh? Yes, that's excellent.
But avoid all rich foods and sauces and be sure to get to bed early. What was that you said? I said good night. You'll be wanting to run along, no doubt. I'm not running along. He looked at his watch. Why the devil are women always late? He said peevishly. She ought to have been here long ago. I've told her over and over again that if there's one thing that makes Uncle Joe furious, it's being kept waiting for his soup. This introduction of the sex motif puzzled me. She? Florence. She is meeting me here. We're dining with my uncle. Oh, I see. Well, so Florence will be with us here along, will she? Splendid. I spoke with quite a bit of warmth and animation, trying to infuse a cheery note into the proceedings, and immediately wished I hadn't, because he quivered like a palsy patient and gave me a keen glance, and I saw that we had got on to dangerous ground. A situation of considerable delicacy had been precipitated. One of the things which make it difficult to bring about a beautiful friendship between G. Darcy Cheesewhite and self is the fact that not long ago I, unfortunately, got tangled up in his love life. Incensed by some quack he had made about modern enlightened thought being practically a personal buddy of hers, Florence had given him the swift heave-ho, and much against my will, but she seemed to wish it, became betrothed to me. And this had led Stilton, a man of volcanic passions, to express a desire to tear me limb from limb and dance buck and wing dances on my remains. He also spoke of stirring up my face like an omelette and buttering me over the West End of London. Fortunately, before matters could proceed to this awful extreme, love resumed work at the old stand, with the results that my nomination was cancelled and the peril passed. But he has never really got over this distressing episode. Ever since then, the green-eyed monster has always been more or less round and about, ready to snap into action at the drop of a hat, and he has tended to docket me as a snake in the grass that can do with a lot of watching. So, though disturbed, I was not surprised that he now gave me that keen glance and spoke in a throaty growl like a Bengal tiger snarling over its breakfast coolie. What do you mean, splendid? Are you so anxious to see her? I saw that tact would be required. Not anxious exactly, I said smoothly. The word is too strong. It's just that I would like to have her opinion of this moustache of mine. She's a girl of taste, and I would be prepared to accept her verdict. Shortly before you arrived, Jeeves was subjecting the growth to some destructive criticism, and it shook me a little. What do you think of it, by the way? I think it's ghastly. Ghastly? Revolting. You look like something in the chorus line of a touring review. But you say Jeeves doesn't like it. He didn't seem to. Ah, so you'll have to shave it. Thank God for that. I stiffened. I resent the view so widely held in my circle of acquaintances that I am a mere hey you in the home, bowing on Jeeves' behests like a Hollywood yes-man. Over my dead body I'll shave it. It stays just where it is, rooted to the spot. A fig for Jeeves, if I may use the expression. He shrugged his shoulders. Well, it's up to you, I suppose, if you don't mind making yourself an eyesore. I stiffened a bit further. Did you say eyesore? Eyesore was what I said. Oh, it was it? I riposted. And it is possible that had we not been interrupted, the exchanges would have become heated. For I was still under the stimulating influence of those specials, and in no mood to brook backchat. But before I could tell him that he was a fat-headed ass, incapable of recognizing the rare and beautiful if handed to him on a skewer, the doorbell rang again, and Jeeves announced Florence.